I want you to take a moment right now and just look around your home.
Or, if you aren't home, just try to picture your living space in your mind's eye.
Yeah, exactly.
hmm
Because chances are, if you were listening to this deep dive, there's a corner of a room somewhere that is currently acting as a sort of museum of past obsessions.
Oh, that is a very familiar museum for a lot of people.
Right. I mean, maybe it's a guitar just sitting in the corner gathering dust,
hmm
or maybe it's a folder on your laptop filled with a half-built website for a business you swore you were going to launch.
Or a drawer stuffed with very specific, very expensive baking tools.
Oh, the baking phase. Yes, tools you haven't touched since that one, like, intense month where you decided you were going to master French pastry.
The price of admission to that particular museum is usually a pretty heavy dose of guilt.
It really is. There's this quiet shame that creeps in. You look at that dusty guitar, and what you feel isn't joy about the time you spent learning a few chords. You just feel a sense of failure.
Because suddenly the urge to learn something completely new has struck you again.
Exactly. Now you want to learn to code or speak Italian.
Hmm.
And you look at your track record and think, well, why can't I just stick to one thing?
We internalize this idea that having a graveyard of unfinished projects is a fatal character flaw. We view it as a lack of discipline.
And that is our mission for this deep dive today. We are exploring the psychology of what is called the M-shaped mind.
Drawing heavily from the source material, the M-shaped mind, the power of the versatile specialist.
Right, and we are going to decode why this scattered feeling, this graveyard of abandoned hobbies, is absolutely not a sign of failure. In fact, we are going to look at why it might actually be a hidden evolutionary advantage.
And we really want to take a measured, thoughtful approach today.
Definitely. No frantic energy here.
Exactly. We want to calmly unpack why that seemingly chaotic urge inside you to constantly pivot is actually a highly sophisticated survival mechanism. It's essentially a superpower of adaptability.
I love that. So let's start with the labels society assigns to this behavior. Because if you jump from interest to interest, the world is very quick to call you unfocused.
Oh, absolutely. They use that classic loaded phrase calling you a jack of all trades.
Right, and it's usually delivered with a slight roll of the eyes. Society loves to cut that quote off right in the middle just to make a point. They say, the jack of all trades is a master of none.
And they just leave it there as a condemnation.
Exactly. But the source brings in the full, historically accurate quote, and it flips the script entirely.
It really does. The complete saying is actually a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Which changes the whole meaning.
It asks us to question the fundamental assumption we've been taught about human potential. Because for a very long time, the world heavily rewarded pure specialists.
Right, we built an entire economic structure around it, praising the person who picked one single track, one specific skill, and just stayed on it for 40 years.
Right, it was a stable environment.
I always think of it like playing a fixed video game level. You know exactly what the boss at the end of the level is going to do because the underlying code never changes.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, so the absolute best strategy in that scenario is to max out one specific stat. You put all your upgrade points into strength because you know exactly what the challenge requires.
Right, if the rules never change, being a hyper specialist is the ultimate winning strategy.
But I guess that highlights the core vulnerability, right? What happens when you are no longer playing a fixed game?
Exactly. We live in a world now where the rules change daily. Entire industries shift overnight. New technologies wipe out old paradigms in a matter of months.
Okay, but I have to push back on that slightly. Because if you look at the real world, the job market still tells a very different story.
How so?
Well, we still heavily compensate the laser-focused specialist, like the specialized neurosurgeon or the highly niched machine learning engineer. They seem incredibly secure and successful. Meanwhile, the person jumping between baking and graphic design is told they are lost.
That is true, but it tells a story of short-term, artificial stability.
Artificial.
Yeah, because society's reward structures often lag decades behind evolutionary reality. Yes, we compensate specialists in highly regulated, artificially stable bubbles. But from an evolutionary biology perspective, the human mind's natural urge to explore is designed for volatility.
Okay, so the brain is basically prepping for things to go wrong.
Exactly. The brain actually releases dopamine when you encounter novel information. Historically, discovering a new food source or a new tool was the literal difference between life and death.
So the brain is essentially assuming the ground is always about to shift.
Precisely. Your brain pushes you to explore different things, to pick up that guitar, to try baking, to look into coding, because adaptability is the ultimate survival tool when the environment is unpredictable.
Wow, okay.
A pure specialist is highly optimized for today's specific environment. But if tomorrow's environment requires a completely different skill, the specialist goes to zero.
They face catastrophic failure.
Right. But the person who feels the urge to constantly explore, their brain is actively building a diversified survival toolkit for a world it knows is inherently unstable.
It's a deep biological drive for resilience. I mean, that makes so much sense. But let's look at the mechanics of how this actually plays out in someone's life.
Because on the surface, it looks messy.
Very messy. If we map out the timeline of a person with these diverse interests, it looks like chronological chaos.
Yeah.
Like 1 year, it is all about fitness and running marathons.
Right. And the next year, they drop the running shoes completely and become obsessed with coding.
And then the next year, it's music theory.
To the outside world, it looks like you are constantly starting over at zero. Like you just abandon one track to begin another at the bottom of the ladder.
But the source material argues you aren't actually starting over. You are collecting structural frameworks. And the specific psychological concept for this is called FAR transfer.
Yes, FAR transfer. It's a fascinating concept.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure. FAR transfer is the cognitive ability to take an idea or a principle or a framework from one completely unrelated area and successfully use it in another.
Okay, so carrying knowledge across boundaries.
Exactly. It's the ability to see the underlying architecture of a problem in one domain and apply a solution you learned in a totally different domain.
Okay, but how does the brain actually do that, though? Like, how do you take something physical, like running a marathon, and apply it to something abstract, like writing software?
The brain does this through a process called neural abstraction.
Neural abstraction, okay.
When you learn to run a marathon, you are learning surface details, right? Shoes, pacing, hydration. But underneath those surface details, your brain is quietly mapping a deep structural framework.
A framework about what?
About energy conservation, pushing past fatigue thresholds, breaking a massive, impossible task into micro goals.
Oh, I see.
So far, transfer happens when your brain strips away the running shoes on the pavement, keeps that naked structural framework of pacing and micro goals, and layers it over a complex software debugging problem.
Oh, wow. I like to think of this almost like culinary fusion.
Culinary fusion, I like that.
Yeah, you take the intense scientific precision of baking, where everything has to be measured to the K-gram and chemical reactions are timed perfectly.
Very true. Baking is pure science.
Right, so you strip away the flour and the yeast, but
Right.
you keep that rigorous scientific mindset and you apply it to writing code.
That's a perfect example.
Or you take the intuitive rhythm and harmony of music theory, you strip away the guitar strings, and you apply that cadence to a business strategy, like understanding the flow of a market or the harmony of a team.
And separately, these are just unconnected hobbies.
Exactly. But when you force them to intersect, you get a massive breakthrough.
Psychological research actually suggests FAR transfer is precisely how true innovation happens. Your immense value is in connecting things that a pure specialist would never think to connect.
Because their brain simply hasn't built those varied structural frameworks.
Exactly. They only have the one framework.
But there is a massive friction point here for the listener. Connecting things sounds amazing in theory, but how do you deal with the crushing feeling of falling behind?
Ah, the fear of falling behind.
Yeah, because while you are busy mentally connecting your fitness phase with your coding phase, your specialist peers are zooming past you in one straight vertical line.
It really feels that way.
They're getting the promotions, they're accumulating titles. It feels like you are losing the race.
Well, it is a painful illusion. You feel like you are falling behind because you are measuring your progress against their straight line.
So using the wrong ruler.
Exactly. You are using the wrong ruler. You are playing a completely different game. And this introduces the core framework of the source material. You are what is called an M-shaped person.
Okay, we hear a lot about T-shaped people in the corporate world. You know, someone with broad surface knowledge and one deep area of expertise. How does an M-shaped mind differ?
An M-shaped person is someone who builds multiple deep peaks of expertise over time. The M represents those distinct, varied peaks.
Okay, multiple peaks.
Yes. But the critical distinction, and this is where most people get tripped up and overwhelmed, is that these skills are not built simultaneously.
Wait, I have to jump in here because this kind of contradicts the frantic, burning urge to learn 6 things right now.
It does, yes.
You are essentially saying that to build these peaks, You have to put most of your interests on hold. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for sheer frustration.
It is frustrating if you view it strictly as delaying gratification, but cognitively, you aren't just making yourself wait. You are allowing a concept to actually take root in your long-term memory.
So it's about depth over breadth at any given moment.
Exactly. The true M-shaped journey happens in seasons or phases of learning. One phase of your life focuses heavily on art. Another distinct phase focuses on your core career. Another on learning something entirely new. You do them one by one.
That reminds me of crop rotation for the brain.
Crop rotation.
Yeah. In agriculture, you can't just plant every single crop in the same field at the exact same time. The roots would just choke each other out.
Right, they'd compete for resources.
Exactly. And you can't plant the exact same crop year after year without exhausting the soil. You grow corn, then the next season you plant legumes to pull nitrogen back into the soil, and then you let the field rest. It's the sequential cycling that makes the ground fertile.
That is a brilliant analogy. If you jump between coding, baking, and guitar in a single afternoon, you trigger what cognitive scientists call context switching.
Which is exhausting.
Highly exhausting. Your brain is constantly flushing its working memory to load the new rules of the new task. You get the illusion of progress because you feel incredibly busy and tired, but you aren't actually building the deep neural pathways required for far transfer.
You never actually build the foundational architecture of the skill.
You don't. To take a framework from baking and apply it to coding, your brain first has to understand the baking framework so deeply, so automatically, that it doesn't take conscious effort anymore.
And moving a skill from conscious effort to subconscious instinct takes time.
It takes an uninterrupted season. The source shares a really powerful anecdote about a man in his 50s that perfectly illustrates the patience required for this.
Right, the man who loved both fine art and computer programming.
Yes. Now, society would tell him he had to choose one.
The classic dilemma.
If he chose art, he might struggle financially. If he chose programming, he might feel creatively hollow. But he didn't choose just one. And crucially, he didn't try to frantically mash them together when he was 20 years old.
He respected the seasons.
Exactly.
Walk us through what that actually looked like in practice, though. How did he structure those seasons?
Well, he used programming as his primary season during his 20s and 30s to earn a living. He wrote back-end databases.
So dry, highly logical, structured work.
Very dry. But he kept art alive in a parallel, slower season. On weekends, he painted landscapes. For decades, these two worlds felt entirely divorced.
The coding paid the bills, the painting fed his soul, they didn't interact.
Right.
So he just lived a divided life for 30 years.
Until he hit his 50s. At that point, computational art and data visualization began to emerge as a real field.
Oh, the timing.
Right. He started looking at the dry data he had been coding for decades. But because he had spent 20 years understanding color theory, light, and composition through his painting season, he didn't just see numbers.
Wow. What did he see?
He saw potential. He wrote algorithms that generated breathtaking, organic digital art. A pure programmer would just make a functional, sterile scatterplot.
Right.
And a pure painter wouldn't even know how to parse the data set, let alone write the algorithm to render it.
He used the screwdriver to dismantle the obstacle.
Exactly. He merged them. But the magic of that far transfer simply couldn't happen by doing both at a surface level when he was young.
You needed time to bake.
It happened by allowing each season to fully, deeply play out until the connections naturally revealed themselves over decades. You cannot force the harvest before the season is over.
But that requires a massive amount of trust in the process. I mean, if we are practicing this patience, building our M-shaped peaks over decades, going through our seasons, what is the ultimate payoff for operating this way?
The payoff is unshakable resilience. And this brings us to the concept of redundancy.
Redundancy. Now, in the corporate world, redundancy usually means someone is getting laid off.
True. But in systems engineering, and especially in biological ecosystems, redundancy is the ultimate form of strength.
Oh, because if a system only has one way to achieve a goal, it is highly fragile.
Exactly. If you look at biological organisms, having multiple overlapping systems to achieve a physiological goal is what keeps the organism alive when traumatized.
So if one skill fails you, or if an entire career path disappears overnight because, say, an AI model learns to do it faster, you have another structural pillar that supports you.
Yes. Because of this redundancy, you are not fragile, you are flexible.
I used to think of this like having multiple backup parachutes. If your main parachute snags, you deploy the backup.
That's how a lot of people view it.
But based on how these skills interact, that metaphor falls a bit short, doesn't it? The M-shaped mind isn't just a bag of backup parachutes.
No, it's not.
It is more like a Swiss Army knife.
I like that.
Right. If the primary blade breaks, you don't just pull out a slightly smaller identical blade. You pull out the screwdriver and completely disassemble the obstacle blocking your path. The tools are totally different, and they give you entirely new ways to interact with the problem.
That is exactly it. Because of this built-in redundancy, a specialist whose single industry collapses simply shatters. But you, with your diverse background and varied cognitive frameworks, you simply pivot. You flex.
Which requires us to fundamentally reframe how we view that graveyard of unfinished projects we talked about at the very beginning.
The dusty guitar, the half-built website.
Yeah, they're not evidence of your inability to commit.
No, they are the backup tools you were forging for your Swiss Army knife, even if you didn't realize you were doing it at the time. They are your customized personal education.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, because redundancy still implies a degree of wasted energy.
How so?
Think about it. If you spent a whole season of your life intensely learning to bake, pouring time and money into the equipment, and your primary career in software engineering is highly successful and never actually fails,
Okay.
hasn't that baking season just been a massive waste of time? You built a tool you never had to deploy for survival.
Well, you only view it as wasted energy if you assume the brain compartmentalizes information perfectly, which we know it doesn't.
Right. The far transfer.
Exactly. Even if you never use the baking skill to survive financially, the cognitive flexibility you gain from learning it actively enhances how you write software.
Okay, so the far transfer of understanding chemical precision and patience.
Yes. The patience you learn from waiting for dough to proof makes you a more meticulous, less impulsive coder.
Oh, that makes so much sense. The process of learning the screwdriver fundamentally altered how you use the blade.
Beautifully put. Nothing is wasted in the M-shaped mind. Every abandoned hobby, every deep dive into a random subject leaves a permanent structural framework in your brain.
It is all part of a highly versatile, deeply interconnected cognitive defense system
Yes.
that completely shifts the narrative from "I am scattered and broken" to "I am strategically versatile and resilient."
It's a much kinder way to look at ourselves, isn't it?
It really is. So let's pull all of these threads together and look at the intellectual ground we've covered today.
We covered quite a bit.
We started by confronting the shame of the half-finished projects. We dismantled the myth that hyper-specialization is the only safe path, recognizing that our brains evolved to explore because the world is inherently volatile.
Right. And then we examined the cognitive mechanics of far transfer, seeing how the brain strips away surface details to apply structural frameworks to totally new problems. Innovation is truly born from connecting distinct worlds.
And we looked at the M-shaped journey, the necessity of moving through seasons, managing our cognitive load, and trusting that deep foundational knowledge will eventually intersect.
Just like the programmer who revolutionized digital art in his 50s.
Exactly. And finally, we saw how this seemingly chaotic path builds profound redundancy. It transforms you from a fragile, single point of failure specialist into a highly flexible, adaptable individual.
So for anyone listening who has spent years feeling a quiet guilt about their shifting passions or staring at that dusty guitar feeling like a failure,
The most important takeaway from the source material is this: you were never meant to be just one thing.
your brain's hardware simply wasn't designed for it.
You were meant to connect worlds.
Your unique combination of skills is an entirely original toolkit. There's no one else with your exact combination of peaks.
And to leave you with something to really mull over, if your graveyard of unfinished projects is actually a customized, highly personal education, what specific future problem has your unique combination of abandoned hobbies perfectly prepared you to solve?
A problem that a pure, narrow specialist wouldn't even have the vocabulary to see coming.
Take a moment. Look at those baking tools. Reflect on the seasons of your journey. And keep exploring.
Like this video, share with your friends, subscribe our channel. Thank you.